Hello, I'm Sarah the Gallifreyan Ravenclaw. So last night was the series finale of the first series of Beyond Paradise. So I thought I'd do a quick review of sort of the entire series as a whole and how it compares to what it's a spin-off from, Death in Paradise. So obviously spoilers for first series of Beyond Paradise and all series of Death in Paradise up to present, which is up to series 12. So don't say I didn't warn you. I remember reading an interview, I think it was just before the first episode went out, one of the writers saying they were looking forward to they'd been looking forward to the opportunity to break the mould, because by series 12 of Death in Paradise the format is pretty much set in stone now. So you have a death, then usually the inspector finds the thing, then there's a motive for almost every suspect, the 4 at least. Then the inspector has their light bulb moment, and then they gather everyone around to reveal the murderer. But also Death in Paradise is filled with all the will they won't they relationship things. So obviously Humphrey and Martha were one of those. Don't forget the scene with the plane and the motorbike. Whereas Beyond Paradise they obviously had the established couple, so they could look into more of the couple problems rather than relationship problems. So I'll start with the differences and then I'll say which one I prefer, the original one or the Beyond Paradise version. So first, Beyond Paradise doesn't always feature a murder. I think that in this series there was only one actual murder. They had missing people, break-ins and injuries, but not actually many murders. So I think this makes it more interesting as well as slightly more suitable for younger viewers, as I probably shouldn't have watched some of the earlier series of Death in Paradise just due to my age at the time. But in Death in Paradise they are obviously starting to have the problem that all series like that do, of there's only a certain number of ways to kill people. I think the record was Midsummer Murders did 30-something series, and by then they'd got very inventive on how to kill people because there aren't that many ways to do it. So obviously this means they won't have that problem because they can do other crimes as well. If you only have 1 or 2 murders a series, you're not getting through the different options as quickly. So then the thing. Now if you didn't understand what I meant, it's the random object that the inspector finds and obsesses about until they solve it. So the non-native bug that was in the ice block and the upside down toothbrush. All those sorts of weird things that if you watch Death in Paradise you can place spot them. They're not in every single episode, but they are in like a majority of them. There's a few where it's other things like, I don't know, all the evidence points to one person but they've also got an alibi. But it is most of the time it's solved by the thing. So I'm not saying there weren't things in Beyond Paradise, but more of the time the case was solved in different ways. So most often actually Kelby on his unrelated call-outs that then turn out to be related. So when he found the car, or he went to the old lady's shed and found that the paint and petrol had been stolen from her. So I do love the thing. It's always a great thing of you then try and work it out. Like, I always use the frozen beetle as an example because I figured out that it was a block of ice before he found the beetle. Don't ask me how. My family were extremely surprised at the end. But I think keeping the thing as much as possible to Death in Paradise is good. It can happen occasionally because obviously it's still Humphrey, but I think keeping that as more a thing in Death in Paradise is a good idea. So then the finding a motive for every suspect. Because in Death in Paradise they have the 4 suspects, usually 3 of which travelled to the island with the person and 1 of which is a local. And then they then discover a motive for every single one. But that hasn't been as big a theme in Beyond Paradise, as they do often find a number of motives but they don't have the 4 suspects thing. And so instead they often more become a suspect because of a motive, not the other way around. And I do feel in the format in Death in Paradise of sort of find a motive for them, go and interview them, get an explanation, come back to find the team and found a motive for a different suspect, go and do the same thing again and again and again until they've done all 4 of them, is a bit stale by now. With 12 series on, that's obviously the format in that, but keeping it to only Death in Paradise is a good thing, because otherwise that's going to get ridiculously stale if you've got that twice a year, because I'm assuming it's now going to be like it was. You have one series, then the other. Maybe not actually starting on the same night as the finale, but starting a couple of weeks later. But I'm assuming that's how they're planning to do it in the future. Obviously, one of the things that remained most consistent is the light bulb moments. And that's especially obvious because it's Humphrey. I think if you actually look at all the 4 inspectors throughout Death in Paradise so far, he's the one who, when he has the light bulb moments, it's being the most obvious. He's the one who then goes, give me this, and runs around like a maniac. Like, don't forget the one at JP's wedding where he literally jumped up going, got it, and like JP stopped halfway through, and Dwayne stopped halfway through the best man speech for the entire team to run off and arrest them, including JP halfway through his wedding. So I'm glad they kept that consistent, because that's also just a very Humphrey thing. If it was one of the other inspectors, I might not have minded so much if they got rid of that. Maybe Neville, you'd keep it, but actually the other 2, I think you probably could get away with them having their light bulb moments in a very different way. But the reveal is done in a very different way. It's probably the most obvious difference, bar the setting, between the 2 series. So instead of gathering everyone round to explain it, instead Humphrey and Esther watch it invisible to the memories, and I found it very Sherlock-esque, but I love it. I think it's way better, and the simple reason is because in Death in Paradise, to hear the full story, most of the time the suspect then has to basically confess. Like, the inspector goes, we know it was you, and they have to instantly say how they did it, why they did it, all the stuff, for us to actually learn that. Which, let's be honest, if you've just committed a crime and they go, oh, you've done it, you're not going to instantly confess. You're going to go, where's your evidence? Because you're going to try and not get arrested for it. But most of the time in Death in Paradise, they end up having to confess just so we can actually find out why they did it. But in Beyond Paradise, they can do it. We see how Humphrey's worked it out. And obviously there is sometimes the things of like, Humphrey just sort of says, like, we may never know exactly what was said, but it made them angry enough to do blah, 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 blah. But that doesn't matter. We know roughly the context of that conversation. We don't need to hear it word for word. So having the seeing it rather than the odd flashback with Humphrey or the suspect talking is a much better way to do it. Especially, I got hooked straight away in the first one because they did it very differently. Of Humphrey had worked out how someone had broken in, but didn't yet know who it was. So he did the whole working out how you could break in thing, and him and Esther trying to sneak in as the person had in their minds before it. So we even saw like him deliberately knocking over the broom to reenact the crime, and that just got me hooked on it instantly. But onto the characters. So Humphrey is as awkward as ever. You wouldn't expect anything different. And his first scene of him having crashed into a tree was very reminiscent of his first episode. He fell out of the window. And when he fell out of the window, I instantly loved him the first time. So seeing him up a tree is the first time we saw him, just 100% nostalgia. And the other thing that gave me so much Humphrey nostalgia was the scraps of paper. And just the random bits he's scribbling on. And then I knew Esther was going to give him a notebook in the second episode. And I knew by the end he'd prove to her why he doesn't use one. When he had all the pieces of paper laid out on the table and was shuffling them around, and she went, you're not supposed to rip them out. And yep, he can't work in that linear way. We know that. And she's learned that. But she's the uptight deputy someone like him needs to actually keep all those notes in order and keep him in order, really. But I like that we have seen her softer side, and she knows most of the town, so she can do sort of like Dwayne did in the earlier series, of all the gossip and all the rumours and stuff about people, and knows them all. Then Kelby. My dad kept saying he's like Marlon, but I think he actually makes Marlon look like a genius. Because apart from running, one of the first things we saw him do was that they're all red scene, where he was trying to spot the similarity between these 12 cars. and it took someone else pointing out that all of them were red. So that shows how smart he is. But he is a nice guy, and I especially liked that scene with the older lady that they all hated getting the call from. And by the end of the episode, he basically adopted her as his granny, which was a great scene. And then Margot is probably my favourite character. Total no-nonsense, mum of the station, even though she's not actually got a rank. She's not actually an officer, she's more a Darlene. But probably the best analogy is she's Catherine. She's the mum of the team, but she's very tough love rather than Catherine's more lovable approach. But I love that, like, the first thing we learned about her, she's like, oh, I get to, like, nose into people's lives. And he was like, yes, that's what background checks are. When I say favourite character, I mean favourite Beyond Paradise exclusive character. Humphrey is my favourite inspector, hands down, so I don't think she beats him, but she's my favourite only Beyond Paradise character. But then on to the not team. So Martha's mum, I think she needed more screen time. Most of the time she was literally just the shoulder for Martha to cry on. She didn't really have her own character, except being Martha's mum. Like, I can't even remember her name. But I liked at the beginning that she did not like Humphrey, especially when he made those really bad references to her being an old crone. But she does, obviously, throughout the series, see how much they love each other and that they can't live without each other. So then, I think in that last episode, she should have been the one going, Martha, come on, you do love him. I know she did say the whole, are we pretending you don't still love him? But I feel she should have gone a bit further with that and really pushed her, which possibly she did in the bit we didn't see, I suppose. Then Archie. I really hope from the ending that means he won't be in the next series, or only will make a couple of tiny appearances, because I feel that if he's there, it's going to get repetitive pretty quickly, because it just goes back to sort of love triangle stuff. But he loved Martha and then saw that she was breaking Humphrey's heart in that last episode the same way she had his. So then tried to be a good friend to Humphrey, and then they ended up rolling around on the floor together. But he was a good metaphor, if you like, for her not wanting to fall back into her old life despite having returned to her hometown. She was happy with Humphrey and she was trying to prove that to people, which by slapping him she certainly did. Onto the superintendent. I think she's great and they're showing a good boss, but she hasn't really had a lot to do either. She's just sort of turned up a few times to try and close down the station or offer Esther promotions. She hasn't really done anything. I'd quite like her in the next series to do what the commissioner has done a few times. Actually join the team for an episode. So someone's missing, I don't know, Esther's off for some reason, so she has to step in and fill her hole. I'd like that to happen, and then she can actually see what the team's like, and then might stop trying to close them, and we'd get to learn more about her and see how good she is at actual police work rather than just sitting behind a desk. So the few other things, the theme tune, love it. I think I prefer it to the Death in Paradise one. I think words probably is half the reason I like it, and it obviously feels very British rather than Caribbean. And then other things in their life, the houseboat, very Humphrey to buy a houseboat, and I loved that the last line of that episode was, oh yeah, it came with a duck. Came with a animal. Sound familiar? Yeah. I worked out pretty quickly that this duck was the new Harry the Lizard, because it's every time they get the shack they go, oh yeah, he comes with the shack. So I went, please tell me by next week he's going to name the duck, and naming it Selwyn was perfect. And all the conversations he's had with the duck. But I do wish in that last scene we'd got to see the commissioner's face to what Humphrey was saying about the duck. And to be fair, Neville, Naomi and Marlon's faces would have been priceless. And Catherine's. I wanted to see all their reactions to that. So I want to see the second half of that scene. I want to see all their reactions to the fact he named his duck Selwyn. But within minutes of it finishing, they'd confirmed a second series had been commissioned. So what do I want to see from it right off the bat? I'm sure Humphrey and Martha will hit some other bump in the road. I hope it's something more in the cafe than their relationship, just because I don't want too much relationship problems. You've got to find other problems that they then have to face together. Because I think in that last scene they've sort of gone, we do accept we can't live without each other. So I think going back to having relationship problems again would feel like that last scene was pretty stale. So I think that they need to have some problem with the cafe that they then try and address together, and then possibly that puts a strain on the relationship in the further down the line. And I also want Kelby to be able to prove himself more. And maybe solve a case and not by accident. Because I said he keeps finding the things that then mean that they can solve the case. But I want him to actually deliberately solve the case and prove himself slightly. And I love the variety of police work, so I want that to continue, especially when it's how Kelby gets the other calls and goes out on those. So I want maybe actually have one of those that we then assume is going to be tied into the main case and actually isn't. Maybe it's tied into a future one, or it's literally just there. So we just see other things happening other than the big case. I also want them to start decorating the houseboat, because I don't think we've actually really seen the interior of it. So we need proper decorating montage inside so we can see the interior and see Humphrey putting his own touch to it. And I really want to meet Esther's daughter, because she was mentioned a couple of times, but we haven't actually seen her. And I said we see Esther softer side at some points, but I really want to see what she's like as a mum. I kind of get why you wouldn't put it in this series, because it was all about parenthood and them trying to become parents. But I want them to now have to get involved with Esther's daughter. Maybe she gets tied up in something, or she just is off school for the day, so Esther has to bring her into the station because she doesn't want to leave her home alone. Also, more Selwyn the Duck. Definitely need more Selwyn the Duck. But overall, to answer the title of the video, I do think it does live up to the original and will possibly outlive it. Maybe not in the sense of how many series is, but I think it may continue a few years after Death in Paradise if that gets cancelled relatively soon, which I hope not, but I said some of the things I are going to struggle with soon is there aren't that many ways to kill people. They are having to get a lot more inventive with them. So there are a lot of elements of it that I do prefer. If I say about the day the first episode was on, because it was on just before the finale of Death in Paradise, and the last 2 episodes of Death in Paradise before that were some of my favourite ever. They felt like a big finale. So you'd had a big finale style 2-parter of Death in Paradise, followed by the new episode of the first ever spin-off. Then you had the finale of Death in Paradise, which compared to the build-up felt like a bit of a letdown. It wasn't a terrible episode, just compared to the 2 before, because I don't think I've ever been as anxious for the next episode to come on as I was the one the week before, because it had ended with Neville being locked up for murder. Like, that's a great cliffhanger. So if it had ended with that, something like that, then it wouldn't have felt so different. But it was just going straight after the new spin-off, which I thought was amazing. It then just sort of went into this relatively ordinary episode of Death in Paradise. So I'd probably have actually happily switched that for the second episode of Beyond Paradise that night. That episode didn't feel finale enough compared to what we'd just had. So I think if you ask me, am I looking forward to Series 13 of Death in Paradise or Series 2 of Beyond Paradise more, I'd probably say it depends on the day of the week, and I'd change all the time. Maybe depends on which one I've watched more recently. But I am looking forward to more of both next year. And I believe a Christmas special was announced for Beyond Paradise as well. I'm not sure if there's both or if it's just for Beyond Paradise. That would be an interesting thing if they only have one for the spin-off, not for the original. So do let me know in the comments if there's things you preferred from Death in Paradise or Beyond Paradise. And maybe things I didn't mention that are different. And things you want to see in the next series of both, I suppose. But other than that, thank you for watching. Bye.